Callan takes place in the Cold War era, and this series portrays with quite overwhelming realism the grimy, dirty and often painful business of undercover operations intended to ensure national security. According to the premise of this show, assuring the safety of the nation when normal legal and diplomatic channels have failed can involve underhand and amoral activities such as fraud, theft, blackmail and murder. Authorities working in a group referred to as the Section, under the command of a man whose title is Hunter, have to be cold, calculating and somewhat amoral themselves, as they make frequent use of unprincipled and unscrupulous means toward the pragmatic end of protecting the nation's security. And of course it is implied that every developed nation will have such a service. To help achieve their end, these authorities are willing to turn to less respectable or honourable members of society who may have developed skills and talents the Section might find useful. Of course, they also recruit professional agents such as Mears and Cross, but they appear to be chosen on the basis of their devotion and ambition, and perhaps their traits of psychopathy. They will tend to follow orders unquestioningly and kill with little reflection or consideration. David Callan, as we know him, this is not his original name, is quite different, though at first glance he may appear to fit the authorities' criteria. Having lost both parents in the London Blitz, Callan displayed the intelligence, determination and spirit required to survive and become self-reliant, but he has retained humanity, curiosity and a sense of fairness. Doubtless lacking direction and purpose, Callan joined the army, serving in Malaysia, and his energy, spirit and survival instincts were channeled to help him become a highly effective soldier, both in terms of tactics and his ability to kill, if required. He has problems with authority and, though he saved an officer's life, he also argued and fought with others of higher rank, perhaps reflecting independent thought, humanity and intelligence. After leaving the army, undoubtedly unable to settle for a prosaic and mundane career in bookkeeping, and perhaps missing the visceral excitement of military sorties and combat, Callan resorts to a life of crime, though he is rather unsuccessful and spends 2 years in prison. It is on his release that the Section approaches him, clearly wishing to take advantage of his skills and character flaws for their own ends. However, Callan brings not just military fighting and survival skills, but also his fundamental humanity, independence and questioning intelligence. He asks questions and seeks to understand when he is expected to obey orders. He may even doubt the wisdom of his instructions and follow his own instincts and common sense, though generally he achieves the mission set to him, but on his own terms and having satisfied his own desire to understand, even if he doesn't always like or approve of the result, reflecting a moral dilemma. Rather like many who fulfill roles they don't particularly like in society, he grudgingly recognises the need for what he does and his own talents and abilities within that context. But he can rue certain decisions and actions that have led to this juncture in his life, and the fact he feels trapped, as he cannot simply change direction since his departure would have security implications, possibly threatening his own survival. What makes Callan such gripping viewing is the existential nature of the world in which these agents work, with little consideration of moral niceties, and the conflict, inner and outer, Callan brings to the piece as he wrestles with his sense of duty and purpose, and the nagging and questioning humanity he demonstrates as he carries out his duties. Callan's one good friend is Lonely, a skilled small-time thief, forger and informer, who regularly helps Callan in the course of his work, without fully knowing Callan's background or situation. In circumstances that rather mirror his own relationship with his superiors, Callan regularly applies bullying tactics in his relationship with Lonely, though he often shows regret at having to resort to such methods, which he uses to ensure control of Lonely and to maintain his compliance, but also to protect his friend by keeping him out of the loop and open to pressure and threat. Another reason for the show's success is the realism of the stories and characters themselves. Made at the height of the Cold War, many of the storylines and settings were vaguely familiar to audiences, and it was intriguing to see headlines brought to life in believable, if sometimes grimy and painful, plots. Characters were always well fleshed out and drawn, and it was rarely a simple case of goodies versus baddies, as all had reasons, valid or otherwise, for their actions, and we as an audience were invited to share in the complexity, pain and consequences of the situation, and sympathised with Callan as he had to act as judge and occasionally executioner, often contradicting his orders, and as he paid a heavy personal price in terms of relationships and personal life for his efforts. This was not the first time in cinema and TV history that those of dubious background or character were used for the purpose of national security. The Dirty Dozen was released in 1967, and there had been numerous Cold War spy films with characters whose motives and backgrounds were a little murky. But I think that Callan was the first to properly delve into the murky existential waters of the Cold War on TV, and fully explore characters, motives, and especially consequences for those involved. In so doing, a unique and almost melancholic atmosphere and mood were created, summed up beautifully by the opening titles and the haunting theme music, and I think the creation of that atmosphere and indeed the premise itself played a huge part in the success of the series. Of course, this premise has been used many times since, in a number of variations of the theme, notably in Luc Besson's Nikita, which itself spawned a TV series and a Hollywood remake. All who wrote, directed, produced and acted in the 4-series film and TV film deserve much praise. But special credit must go to Edward Woodward and Russell Hunter, who created indelible characters still worth seeking out and watching more than 50 years after they first played them. My thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it of some value.